Legend of Total War here, and today we're going over another blog that was released a few hours ago. Wasn't expecting two blogs in a row, but this one here is focusing on the free content that's coming for Warhammer 3 Thrones of Decay on April 30th. And normally I probably wouldn't have made a video on this one. However, I think there's some really interesting stuff in here, and I think it's worth discussing. I remember with Shadows of Change, I didn't bother reading all the blogs, because most of that stuff was just like, here's the new legendary hero, and it's just a melee character. It just wasn't that interesting. But this one here's got a lot more content, and the stuff that's coming is more interesting. The main thing I want to focus in this video here is the Nemesis crown, which is down the bottom, but I will be going through all of the content here. So first thing to talk about is the free legendary lord Epidemius. I'm really grateful to Creative Assembly that they've listened to the community and stopped just giving boring legendary heroes for free, which didn't really offer much replay value, and have actually added the first free legendary lord into Warhammer 3. I mean, you could argue that Be'lakor was a free legendary lord, but then again, he was available to play in the Realms of Chaos campaign, just didn't have his own campaign. So, you know, argue that one whichever way you want. But yeah, he's the first actual FLC character tied to a DLC at least. Now, in terms of implementing FLC legendary lords, comparing it to how things went with Warhammer 2, which the thing is with Warhammer 3, I'm comparing everything that happens in Warhammer 3 to Warhammer 2, because Warhammer 2 was great. You know, start off not so amazing, but they really picked up their pace as they're going along, like with the reworks and the quality of the DLC. Many of you guys who were following during Warhammer 2 are probably fairly fond of how Creative Assembly handled Warhammer 2. You know, they really hit their stride fairly early on. They kept it going the whole way through. So when it comes to Legendary Lords implementations, there's a lot of Legendary Lords that were implemented for free during Warhammer 2, and some were implemented better than others. So as an example, Lords that were implemented that had like a DLC feel to it, those were the better ones. Now, what I mean by that is if you take a character like Ichotclaw is a DLC character. He doesn't just have the generic Skaven gameplay. He also has on top of that his Forbidden Workshop, which Queek and Skrulk, which are the base game factions, they don't have their own unique mechanic. I guess you could argue that Skrulk has a unique version of the Plague, at least it doesn't affect him as much, but that's, I would say, a very minor tweak. And then you compare that with Tretch Craventail, who was the first introduced legendary lord for free for Warhammer 3, and he doesn't have any of his own mechanics. So he really does come across as kind of a boring character, because he is redundant in terms of playstyle, because he plays very similarly to Queek Headtaker. So, you know, they're both melee characters, both good at dueling, both don't have mounts, they both boost Storm Vermin, and they're both really good at ambushing. So a bit redundant, whereas if you take the High Elves, for example, with Elithanar, the first High Elf legendary lord introduced for free, he had his own campaign mechanic that makes him completely unique from the other High Elf experiences. In fact, he's one of my favorite High Elf campaigns to play, even though he's not a DLC character, which usually the DLC characters are like the best ones. So he has his assassination mechanic. He goes out and assassinates targets based on randomly selected targets, and you get influence based on that. And you're also able to play kind of like a Skaven, able to use the underway stance and ambush attack, which is very useful for me because I love ambushing, so that's very useful. And it basically combined two of my favorite factions, the High Elves and the Skaven, all into one. So you got a very different experience with Elithanar. And then you've got a legendary lord like Imric, who probably doesn't have as intensive of a unique campaign mechanic, but at least he has his dragon encounter. So he's got his unique dragons that he can use as Regiment of Renown, and also when he encounters those dragons later on in this campaign, you can get various buffs from them. Whereas, like I said, Tretch Craventail doesn't really have any of that. Now, based on what I've read here so far with Epidemius, it kind of falls a bit more on the Tretch Craventail side of things than on the DLC Lord side of things, because he doesn't seem to have his own unique mechanic. He just is like a generic Nurgle legendary lord. His campaign will play out pretty similarly, at least as far as I can see, to Kugath's. You know, he's got the plague mechanic, but he doesn't have any other sort of mechanic to work with. But he's got his stat buffs. So let's go through it. I'm not going to go over the lore because, you know, there's other YouTubers that do that stuff way better than me. So faction effects here. So it gains powerful rewards based on the number of plays active on non-Nurgle factions. So this is a passive mechanic. This is just something that happens in the background. You're not actively doing it. I mean, unless you're really trying to get plagues out there, which I imagine you probably will. As for what this does, some of the other YouTubers might be able to explain it, but I'll get access to this fairly soon and we'll go into it. I mean, maybe these will have something other than just maybe buffs, but I'm not entirely sure. But this doesn't come across as overly potent, at least compared to Tamarkan's mechanic. I think this is a little bit lackluster. I wasn't expecting it to be something crazy, but this was a bit boring as well. So 25% Plague Cultist campaign movement range, that's a bit boring. Recruitment rank +2 for Plague Bearers of Nurgle and Exalted Plague Bearers of Nurgle. I'm sure you're going to be recruiting a fair few of those in your campaign, but that's not that big of a deal. And cycle time -1 for Plague Flesh Poppies building. Also, those effects there are just not super impactful, at least in compared to what some of the other factions are getting. And then Lord effect here. So this is what Epidemius himself provides. Ability Tallyman's Blade. I have to see how that actually performs. I think they've got a description down here. Passive ability, regeneration when fighting against an enemy with plague. I imagine most of the time you'll be getting that, and that's not regeneration for his entire army, it's just for himself, which again, that's not that big of a deal for Nurgle, since you'll have access to Nurgle spellcasters, which will be able to give you Fleshy Abundance, which basically heals you to full with one cast, so not that big of a deal for Nurgle. And then melee attack +5 when fighting against an enemy with plague. This comes across as a +5 leadership on a Wednesday when it's raining sort of thing. This isn't for the entire army, and it's just not that impactful. And for a Legendary Lord's effect, yeah, there is so much more impactful Legendary Lord abilities in the game. But maybe his skill line will make up for it, which I haven't seen yet. So battle details. So the Tally of Pestilence, intensity-based passive ability that it improves as friendlies continue to kill, which gives a buff to melee attack and weapon strength. Epidemic Outburst, active explosion that damages and knocks enemies back, increases his mass, increases his acceleration. So these are abilities that he himself will get, I guess through his skill line. Here's the Tallyman's Blades. Summons Exalted Plague Bearers that degrade over time. Upgraded versions summon Exalted Plague Bearers that do not degrade. So kind of a Dryker ability. Seen it before, but that's definitely good. Being able to get a Exalted Plague Bearer for free in every battle that he's in, definitely a good thing, because that ability with Dryker where she summons Dryads, that's really damn handy. And then Sands of Sickness. Chain Augment that can spread buffs to allies and debuff foes, improve melee damage reflection, you know, buff, debuff, debuffs. You know, we've seen that kind of stuff before. Nothing bad about it. He does seem to have a lot of these abilities to him, so that's cool. New campaign-only battle abilities. So the Earthfather's Blessing, passive ability that activates when the enemy hit points are low, causing damage to the enemy. Summons 1 unit of Nurglings when nearby enemies die. So this one here, it just goes on, right? It's basically got like 4 or 5 levels to it, where it goes, first one is Nurgling, and then it upgrades to Spawn of Nurgle, then it goes to Spawn of Nurgle, and then the 4th one is a Great Unclean One. Now, if we notice up here, they mentioned that the Plague Bearers that degrade over time, but they don't mention that they degrade over time here. So, I mean, you can find out this information by watching another YouTuber, but I just don't have that information on me right this very moment. Is this something that you can only get once or twice in a battle? And do these Nurglings, Spawn of Nurgle, whatever, do they not degrade? If that's the case, that's pretty cool, because summons that last for only about a minute, they're not that valuable. But if you can get a summon that is permanent throughout the rest of the battle, that is very potent, and that is something that gives him an edge over other Nurgle Legendary Lords, that's for sure. However, it may be the best way to play Epidemius might be to play as Tamarkan, and then confederate him so that you get all of these abilities here, and the only thing that you're not going to get is the faction effects, which I don't think are particularly potent anyway. Anyway, the other one here is Epidemic Outbreak, which is an upgrade for Epidemic Outburst here. So overall, he seems like a pretty potent character for sure, and I'm looking forward to playing him. But as I said, in terms of how he's being implemented, he does fall, at least from my initial perspective, falls a little bit on the Tretch Craventail side of things, as opposed to the Elithana or Imric side of things. You know, the better implemented legendary lords for free in Warhammer 2. Then we've got the free hero Gold Wizard. So now the Empire gets the full College of Magic, all 8 laws of magic available as heroes. Metal magic is way more potent in Warhammer 3 than it was in 2, so this is great. Getting a Gold Wizard is good. He's on foot, he's on a horse, he's on a Pegasus mount. The only hero, the only wizard for the Empire that gets a different mount is the Beast Wizard, and that it can have a Griffin. Would have been interesting if they could have given him something else, but I'm not complaining. I'm just saying it would have been interesting. So that's cool. I mean, we've seen how wizards perform, and Law of Metal. So that's, you know, it's just a different flavor of magic for the Empire. And then there's some new items here that's available. So the Armor of Taranis, passive augment that activates when casting spell, grants ward save. The gold standard active augment grants a single unit invulnerability. So that all seems pretty cool. So that's just, I guess, items that you will randomly get throughout the campaign. All right, so the new thing that I wanted to talk about here was the Nemesis crown. So I think we've got a really decent amount of information here to go off. And the main thing I'm comparing this one to is the Sword of Cain. Now, if you've watched me for long enough, you'll know that I do not like the Sword of Cain. Anytime I'm playing the High Elves, people always come on saying, "Oh, are you going to pick up the Sword of Cain?" And I'm just like, "No." Or they ask, "Hey, Legend, should I pick up the Sword of Cain?" I'm just like, "No, you shouldn't pick up the Sword of Cain." It's like a weapon that is, you should only ever pick it up if you're absolutely desperate. It's not something that you use to win the campaign. It's something that you use to prevent you from losing the campaign, because it can be so detrimental. You really should hold on to it for a little bit and then put it away. Unless, of course, you can mitigate a lot of its penalties, which some factions can do. Now, I think that the Nemesis crown is on a whole other tier entirely. This one looks like something that you may want to actually get, because the penalties don't seem that severe and can probably be mitigated, and the benefits actually kind of seem better. Okay, so maybe it doesn't make you quite as strong as the Sword of Cain does, but from my understanding, the Nemesis crown doesn't take up an item slot. It's just like a faction ability that mostly affects just one character. So just going over this, we can see here that the fledgling crown, it can be leveled up. It tells you how to level it up. We'll get into that in a minute. But at level 1, diplomatic relation -20 with all factions, faction-wide. Similar to the Sword of Cain, which does, I think, -10 at rank 1. So it causes problems with all factions, but gives you diplomatic relations with the Empire. Hit points plus 10%, that's good. Ability Nemesis Crown, don't have information on that, but I'm sure it's potent. Weapon strength plus 5%, missile strength plus 5%, passive ability, Crown's Corruption. Right, and we can see here what the next level provides. I don't know how many levels there are, but I would assume that there would be 3. You level it up by fighting a certain number of battles with the holder of the crown in a certain amount of time. So if you don't fight 4 battles within 7 turns here, the Nemesis crown disappears. I think that's really cool, because if you're not fighting battles, you probably don't need it, and it'll just randomly appear somewhere in the world. That actually kind of reminds me of Battle for Middle-earth 2, where randomly in your battle, Golem can show up with the ring, and whichever player can kill Golem and get the ring gets to either summon Galadriel or Sauron. I thought that was really cool. It could oftentimes win or lose you the battle, depending on who got it. So this can just appear randomly somewhere in the world, and whoever loses it, it'll just appear randomly again. It also means that if you encounter someone that has the Nemesis crown, it may be in your best interest just to not engage with them and let the crown dissipate and go somewhere else. It definitely isn't going to make you on your own as invincible as the Sword of Cain does, because the main thing for invincibility is ward save, and the Sword of Cain, that's a heavy ward save buff, especially because it takes up the sword slot, which there's very few items in the game for weapons that will provide you with ward save in that slot. So you can combine that with other equipment like the Armor of Destiny, Talisman of Preservation, really stack up loads of that ward save. Some characters will cap out at about 50% even with the Sword of Cain, but there are other characters, such as the Cathay characters, because they've got a banner as well that gives you 20% ward save, that can really stack on up to 90% ward save, making you basically invulnerable to anything but the most heavy-hitting characters. So I think this is actually something that I will pick up in my campaign, because the diplomatic relations -20 with all factions, that's definitely going to hurt Order-tied factions. But if I'm playing something like Beastmen, already Beastmen don't care about the penalties from the Sword of Cain, because they don't have public order, everyone hates them anyway, and they don't suffer upkeep, so all the benefits with none of the drawbacks. And them picking this up would be even better as well, because it doesn't take up an item slot, as far as I'm aware. So it doesn't take up any equipment. You can wear your Armor of Destiny, Sword of Cain, Talisman of Preservation, then whatever else you got, and wear the Nemesis crown. Get yourself extra hit points, make your army a bit stronger, but you'll suffer diplomatic penalties. It's good to see that it wasn't stacking on additional public order penalties, which can be quite debilitating in, especially on legendary difficulty. And it's good also to see that the upkeep penalty isn't faction-wide, at least at level 2. Maybe at level 3, or if there's a level 4, maybe then it goes to faction-wide. At that point, it's probably better to put it away, unless you're absolutely rolling in cash and everything else is just not a problem. But overall, I'm really happy with what I'm seeing here with the Nemesis crown. At first, I thought, when they mentioned it was coming, I was like, oh yeah, here comes another Sword of Cain. Another weapon or item that is in the game that's really strong, but also has a massive drawback. But I think in this case here, the drawback isn't that bad. So I will probably pick it up in my campaigns. Unless, of course, you know, I really need that diplomatic relations. But yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing here with the FLC content. It was also nice of Creative Assembly to give modder shoutouts, because a lot of the content has already been provided by modders, which now makes like, I guess you could still download it. I didn't say anywhere that they're making them close it down. One thing that this reminds me of, I don't know if you guys remember, maybe 8 years ago now, with Rome 2, I kicked up a big stink about this. The Desert Kingdoms DLC. When that one came out, there was already basically Desert Kingdom mods available, so these factions were already available. The content that was being advertised was not that different from the mods, but what they did was they made those mods unavailable anymore. And so even if you had been playing the game for years with the Desert Kingdoms as a mod, suddenly you had to buy a faction that you've been playing for ages anyway. And I kicked up a big stink about it because they never thanked any of the modders or anything, and they just took all the mods down. But at least they're giving the modder shout outs now, so that's good. And maybe these mods are still available, which I would hope that they would be, but we'll see. Anyway, overall, I think that's the end of this blog here. Overall, I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing. Let me know in the comments below what you think of the FLC content, and if you're looking for how to unlock it, there's information on the blog here, so I'll leave a link to it so you can fix yourself up so that you get it come April 30th. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.